Hey friends, it's Dimitri with Nebraska Streetwear. I'm running some errands right now and I wanted to talk about an interesting topic today, and that is how to stop being a struggling artist. So this is a common trope that is in culture, in movies, in daily life. You hear about it, you kind of see it. And maybe some of you are in that sort of category. You are a struggling artist, a creative that's trying to gain traction. And running a clothing brand is inherently creative. So there's two things operating with your clothing brand, whether you see it or not. So there is the science that's operating, and there's the soul. The soul is basically all of the creative aspects of your brand, which is even the brand itself, because branding is all creativity. It's the colors, the typefaces that you use, the style, the aesthetic, the feeling of the brand. So when people message you, you might get messages like this down the road. They say, hey, I saw this thing today, or I watched this movie, or I played this game, and it totally reminded me of your brand. If you get messages like that, that means that your branding is solid enough for people to associate certain things with it, and that's a good thing. That means that your brand is going in the right direction. And other aspects of the soul of your brand is basically the videography, the photography, the actual designs on your clothing, even the type of clothing you use, the cut, the shape of it, the materials, the buttons, that kind of stuff, if you don't make specifically graphics. Anyway you slice it, your clothing brand is going to have a strong soul, and that's the creativity of it. Now the science is everything that has to do with the business side of a clothing brand, the systems, the administrative stuff. Maybe you have employees, the manufacturing, warehouse space, logistics, all of that kind of stuff. The stuff that's probably is sometimes boring to a lot of people, especially creatives. And this is the tricky thing. So if you're a struggling creative, the reason why you might be struggling is that you have not invested enough time, money, and energy into learning the science for running your brand. You might have a very strong brand artistically and the creativity is down, and it is a strong brand in itself, but you're still struggling because you have not really gone deep down into the science behind running a clothing brand. And a clothing brand, like I mentioned earlier, I would say it's really 50-50 down the middle between the soul aspect of it and the science aspect of it. And I'll give you an example of a different business to kind of get your brain working. So let's say that you have a company that makes toilet paper. That's a really boring utilitarian product, and making and selling something like that really doesn't require any soul for the most part. You can have a company that sells toilet paper and the branding is barely there. You just have some kind of corporate logo slapped on. You don't do any marketing or really advertising. You don't really have a social media presence at all, but you're still making record sales simply because of the fact that a toilet paper is a necessity, and it's a very utilitarian product that is disposable, and people repurchase it over and over again. And really, at the end of the day, people don't care about the branding and the creativity and all that can be put into that kind of business. They care if it works and if it's comfortable enough for their butt. That's the two main things you got to focus on. So if you were running a brand like that, your sole focus would be on the science, all of the logistics of that. Where am I getting the toilet paper manufactured? Who am I marketing it to? Can we get distribution? How many plies is the toilet paper? That kind of stuff. That business really doesn't have a soul, and it's not important to anyone. Maybe there are examples of it where it does have a soul, but for the most part, that's kind of a very scientific business. Now, clothing, it has both elements really, really strongly, the soul and science. And like I mentioned earlier, even if you don't make clothing with specifically graphics and all of that, you still are putting a lot of creativity into clothing. Like just the finish of it, the cut, the materials you use, the colors you use, all that kind of stuff really matters. And you do need creativity for that. So how can you start to get out of the trap of being a struggling creative? I think when you start out, you will be a struggling creative, and that's gonna inherently be a part of trying to grow a brand, because it's very difficult. Right now there's lots of brands, so that means lots of noise that you have to cut through, and you have to find your market. But once you kind of start to get away from that and you start growing, what you want to do, and even early on what you want to do, is you want to invest adequate time each day into growing your systems, learning how to operate your brand efficiently, effectively, reach more customers, really carve out your niche in what you're trying to do, and don't neglect that. Being a competent artist or designer and branding and all that is not going to be enough to facilitate a brand that's going to grow and, be something that you can actually make your dream job. You don't want to be a struggling creative your whole life. And what that does too is that it kind of sucks out the joy of running a brand. You're going to be able to invest more time into the creativity aspect of your brand when you have the systems down, the science down very well. When stuff is flowing really well day to day and operations are smooth and you don't have a bunch of hiccups and fires that you're trying to put out every single day, like major fires that are occurring each and every day, that's not a fun thing to run as a brand or a business. And what you want to do if you're inherently a creative person is you want to focus on the creativity part, even though you do have to invest into the science part as well. And what can happen as well is if the science is lacking in your brand, you can have a lot of burnout. And I'll give you an example. Let's say that you are screen printing everything and your operations are very sloppy, they're very slow, you haven't really thought out how you can do stuff efficiently and effectively so that you can mass produce t-shirts and all that kind of stuff. Well, you're gonna just be having a lot of burnout trying to make everything yourself, and things just are not running smoothly because you haven't invested enough time and energy into figuring out all of those processes so that could be a smooth operation for you. So definitely each day focus on learning the science behind your brand, all the systems, the logistics, the manufacturing, the shipping, customer service, all that kind of stuff. Make sure all of those details are being taken care of, especially as you scale. Because what will happen as you scale is more money equals more problems. More customers equals more demand. You have to be appropriately scaling and putting attention into certain things as your business scales. You can't just solely be focused on all the creativity and the design of it. And I'll give you kind of another example of what I mean with the science and the soul. So let's say that you have a car, has a really bulletproof engine, a great drivetrain, transmission, awesome wheels, but it's really ugly outside. It's kind of rusty. The seats are uncomfortable. The radio sound quality is not nice. It's really not a comfortable car to drive. But the vehicle will take you from point A to point B, and it is a pretty solid ride. Now contrast that with a car that has a very bad engine, it's leaking oil, it's not really reliable, it's slow, but the exterior of the car is very pretty, it's beautifully polished, has heated leather seats, beautiful audio system. Both of those cars will probably get you to your destination, but they're not going to be a ride that's enjoyable. A perfect car would be a car that has a really bulletproof engine, all the mechanics, all the engineering is down, and that is all of the science. All of that is taken care of. But then the soul of the car, the appearance of the car, all of the creative aspects of the car, the real comforts that come from it, that is also taken care of. That's what makes a beautiful car. Like a perfect example of this would be like a Porsche. They are both engineered really, really well, but they're also, a very, very beautiful car. And they're like kind of almost a near perfect example of engineering and design together, meshed into one thing. And that's essentially what you're trying to do with your brand and clothing business. You're trying to take care of all of the engineering and science behind it, while at the same time being a fun and creative brand that's constantly innovating and making new designs and reaching new audiences, and there's a cult following behind your brand. That's what you're always trying to aim for. You can't just put all of your energy into one side or the other. That's how you're going to be starting to slip into failure, and you're going to become irrelevant. And like I said earlier, there's a lot of noise and a lot of competition. So if you can manage those two things effectively, and if you are putting time into the science behind your brand every single day, you're going to be on a much better trajectory than if you don't. Now, I don't really emphasize putting a lot of time into the artistic side of your brand, the soul, because I think a lot of you watching this are probably already oriented in that way, and you already do have solid designs and a solid framework for a brand. So keep that up. Obviously, you don't want to neglect that by itself at all, because like I said earlier, a clothing brand really is like 50% soul and 50% science. So keep up the creativity part of your brand, and always, make that obviously a big focus running your brand.